Welcome to Listen with Love, Conversations about Spiritual Direction. I'm Suhail Stephen.
And I'm Mary Coswin.
And our hope is that this podcast deepens people's understanding, appreciation, and engagement with spiritual direction, that it encourages individual spiritual directors, those in training, and the programs that form them. And finally, we hope that our conversations reflect how spiritual direction feels in our listening, pacing, questions, and focus on the experience of God.
That's a tall order, Suhail, but I think it's something to reach for. So let's continue.
Indeed. Well, how are you coming to our time today?
Well, since this is the 5th episode, I'm feeling like we're getting there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this has been good for me to reflect on a practice that I did for many years, just to kind of deepen my appreciation for it and to, I don't know, maybe think about the present spiritual directors and to appreciate them.
Yeah. You had said last time after we finished that it had felt more natural than the first time we sat down to record.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I guess we're sort of learning the ropes, aren't we?
Yes, and it feels like just kind of how we always talk with each other.
Yeah, that's right. Well, is there anything you wanted to say about how your morning or day has gone so far prior to this recording?
Well, not really. Life is full of challenges.
Yes.
And it's interesting that my own spiritual director contacted me this morning. I had to cancel our last session, so I reached out and I didn't hear from him. And I reached out again and said, you must be busy, but I still want to meet. And he said, oh, sorry, I've been busy. Thanks for your understanding. So now we have a date.
That's great. Yeah.
So that feels good.
I meet with my director next Tuesday in a week, or I guess in a few days. Yeah.
And you have a director via Zoom,
I
right?
do, yes.
Yeah, me too.
Yours is on Zoom currently,
yes.
right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that would also be a good theme, I think, to visit at some time in this conversation, because I think, well, during and post-COVID, spiritual direction has happened a lot on Zoom, understandably so, and that's a new dynamic probably in the history and the tradition of spiritual direction, which was probably much more focused on in-person interaction, right?
Well, actually, a lot of spiritual direction took place via letters.
Correct. Actually, I think St. Ignatius wrote something like, 1,000 or 2, or maybe even closer to 5 to 10,000 letters, which were essentially forms of spiritual direction. Mm-hmm. You're right.
Mm-hmm. And I think John and Teresa, John of the Cross and Teresa of Ávila, wrote. And also, I think it's the practice of the prayer of presence, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe it was Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection. He would write to his directees.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. I had forgotten that was a part of it. Yeah. So letter writing, of course, in-person meetings were the bread and butter of spiritual direction for the majority of time. And now, in the 21st century, we have a new dimension, which is the online experience of spiritual direction.
Yes. And we can even record it.
Yes. That's right.
The practice continues, but in different forms as we develop as a human community.
Yes, that's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now that as we're talking about this, I wish I could speak to some of the people who are suffering in the world. I wish I could speak to somebody in Ukraine or in Gaza, and help them to express what's going on for them. That just came out of the blue, but I'm very concerned for those people.
Indeed.
And what's God like for them and what God's doing in their lives.
Yeah. Well, we're recording this a day after supposed ceasefire after 2 years of war and genocide. We're recording this a day after that news has been announced that there's a ceasefire. And I don't know if you saw any videos or pictures from this, but both Palestinians in Gaza and, of course, Israelis, families especially, whose hostages remain in Gaza, the scenes of jubilation and singing and dancing, that was something to behold, wasn't it?
It was beautiful. I mean, I felt like I was right there. And I mean, what struck me was there's jubilation and joy, and it isn't even in effect yet. But they're anticipating. This gives them such hope and joy. It was beautiful. I hope it is accomplished.
Yeah. Well, we hadn't planned to talk about this, but I was thinking about that very thing yesterday. What would it feel like to, after 2 years, finally have some semblance of hope that perhaps this nightmare is going to be over? What would that feel like? And the only thing that I could really think of was my own feelings during COVID when there was finally the announcement of there's a vaccination out there for this thing. And I went downtown to the Winnipeg Convention Center and, got my vaccination. And I remember when I had got the vaccination, the joy and the sort of relief and exhilaration that I felt, I was about ready to hug all the nurses and the medical practitioners there. But it was just this surge of hope of like, finally, there's some light at the end of this tunnel, even though we're not out of the woods.
That's
something
a
has
good example
happened.
of what they might be experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's like a drop in the bucket to what I'm sure people in that conflict are experiencing, in that war, in that genocide are experiencing. But I would too love to see how spiritual direction would be contextualized in settings like that. That's beautiful. Yeah.
I think journalists do a little bit of that.
Yeah.
If they're good journalists,
to elicit and evoke those
to elicit their experience and what would give them such joy and what's their vision and yes.
What would be a first question you'd ask someone in Gaza or Ukraine if you could sit with them?
Just what is it like for you to see your city, your home, the way it is now? What does that feel like? What does that evoke in you? What's happening for you inside?
Yeah.
What would you say, Suhail?
Oh, man. Well, it's funny you asked me that because during the summer, I had actually been thinking and even praying for more of a sense of camaraderie with people who feel similarly about some of the things we're talking about. Specifically for me, like what's been happening to the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank has been very heavy on my heart for a long, long time, even preceding the last 2 years. And just to be clear, it's not in any way to say that what happened to Israelis on October 7th, 2023 was nothing. I mean, that was an atrocious, those were war crimes. Those were horrific for sure. So anyway, this summer, I began thinking and praying just very casually, it'd be wonderful to have some people who I could resonate with about how I feel about some of these things. And specifically, even in the Christian community, I mean, there's a large swath of Christian support in some ways for what's happening. The bombing and the war and the methodology. There's been a lot of Christian support in the West for what Israel is doing, for example. That's been also unsettling. And so anyway, long story short, my son and I went to a little shop in Wolseley once, and I saw a gentleman there reading a book called The 100-Year War of Palestine or something. And I'm familiar with the title, haven't read the book. And, oh, that's interesting. I thought maybe I should go talk to him, but I didn't. We were busy. And then later that day, I was at the bookstore, McNally Robinson, and I was with my family, but I wanted to go check out another section in the bookstore. And wouldn't you know, the same guy is standing there in that aisle, you know?
My.
And so I said to him, you know, were you in the coffee shop this morning? And yes, of course he was. And we exchanged it. It ends up he's Palestinian.
Oh, isn't that
And he...
incidents?
Yeah. And so this is all to just tell you what I said to him. I didn't actually ask him a question at first. I just said, I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, I am so sorry for what your people are going through right now. I cannot even imagine what this must feel like for you. And I guess I just wanted him to know that I deeply care and that I feel it's not right and that it was an honor to meet him. That's kind of how I began.
Oh.
So I think in some ways I probably wouldn't have any capacity to be a spiritual director at first in the traditional sense. I would probably just cry and say, I'm so sorry for what you have endured. And I don't know if I would have much more idea than that, at least for a beginning.
I think that's a great beginning, Suhail. I mean, that is the essence of spiritual direction, is a compassionate presence.
Yeah.
It's not about asking all the right questions or
Yeah.
actually saying anything except, I'm with you.
Yeah.
And you know, what this makes me think of, although we didn't plan on this direction that we're taking here, we talk about spiritual direction. And sometimes I think people might get the idea that it's about praying or church.
Yes.
It's talking about God. And it is all of that. It can be. But it's really about what's real. It's about life and how it's affecting us.
Yes.
So I'm one of those who can be turned off by the word spiritual if people cut it off from the rest of life.
Yes.
I don't want to say it's life direction because it sounds like coaching.
Yeah.
But it is. It's all
more
about
than
life.
it's more than just a narrow sliver of one's life.
Yeah. So you can bring anything to the conversation.
Correct.
And my own spiritual director is so open to whatever I bring.
Yes.
So I'm very aware, grateful, and very strong in my opinion about that, as you might be able to tell.
I can tell. Well, I can't remember which conversation we had where we were talking about Thomas Merton's definition of spiritual direction, you know, and it was from that book called Spiritual Direction and Meditation, I think in 1962 or something publication. So I went and found it and just was reviewing some of it in preparation for this conversation. And he said something very much along the lines. He said, you cannot think of a spiritual director in the same way that you think of like going to the dentist. You know, I will bring the matters of the spirit, as in my prayer and my church attendance, to my spiritual director. I'll bring the matters of my teeth to the dentist. You know, I'll bring the matters of my money to the bank. He said, no, that's completely wrong, because a spiritual life is more than just the life of, you know, what you say to God in prayer or your church attendance. It's your entire life.
Yes.
That is what constitutes the spiritual, quote unquote, in spiritual direction. I thought it was great. Don't go to your director in the same way you would go to your dentist. Like, there's one small concern, well, a large concern, several teeth, you know, but you don't go to your director as you would to a dentist who's a specialist. You go to your director with the whole of your life.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And that is what makes it spiritual.
That's a great image.
Isn't it great?
Yeah. You don't just go like you go to a dentist.
Yeah.
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 Fix this tooth. I have a pain here.
Well, so far where we've come in this podcast, the first few episodes was kind of just orienting ourselves and our listeners to who we are, what this is about. It's just establishing some groundwork based on a more personal introduction of ourselves to the world, to the galaxies beyond. And then in our last series of conversations, we took some time to think through and talk about what spiritual direction is. I liked your take that it's sometimes helpful to distinguish it from what it isn't in our definition and our understanding. And these next two conversations continue in that vein of trying to clarify or to understand the terms. So this first conversation we're going to have is, what is a spiritual director? And then the subsequent conversation will focus on what is a directee, because those are two very important, often used terms whenever anyone talks about spiritual direction. So we thought it would be good to give some time and attention to those terms.
Yes, and we've broached that subject in a previous conversation, talking about the listener and so on.
Correct.
But this will be even more focused.
Yeah. Well, I found this quote from a book called Spiritual Direction, A Practical Introduction by Sue Pickering. It's a 2008 publication. Have you ever heard of it?
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, it's quite a nice resource, I would say, for both understanding but also for supplementing your practice as a spiritual direction. And anyway, in the book, she describes spiritual direction as taking place when one person, the director, prayerfully supports and encourages another person, the directee, to attend and respond to God. And she goes on to say, as a fellow pilgrim, the spiritual director accompanies the directee on this journey of faith. The real director is the Holy Spirit, who initiates and inspires the directee's deepening relationship with the Trinity, themselves, with others, and with the realities of life in the global village of the 21st century.
As we've just been saying.
Yeah. But I love that very simple and I think elegant description that direction happens when one person, a director, prayerfully supports and encourages another person, a directee, to attend and respond to God. What do you think of that?
I think it's very clear. I think it's very succinct. I agree totally with it. What comes to mind as you say that is the image that Spiritual Directors International, this organization that is worldwide, actually, the image of the three chairs. And in our training program, which was entitled Shekinah, which is the feminine, divine, immanent presence of God, we used that a lot. And actually, we, at the end of Shekinah, one of our students who's good with wood made chairs for us as a gift, parting gift. So it's called the third chair. Anyway, the third chair is God's presence. So God is always present. So the third chair is always filled. And so it's in the presence of God. And it's with God as part of the conversation.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
However we conceive of God. Could be Jesus, the Holy Spirit, could be the Trinity, the divine presence in some way.
That's beautiful. Well, do you still have that chair somewhere around?
I do. It's on my patio.
You should bring it into this room when we record.
It's a bit of a clunky wooden chair, but it stood the test of time. It's been outside for 2 years.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, so jumping into this topic intentionally, what is a spiritual director? I thought maybe it'd be interesting to begin by asking you, how many directors have you had, and what did you notice they had in common?
I don't know how many spiritual directors I've had. I'm, too old to remember all of them. But I do remember 3 or 4 in particular. 3 are men and 1 is a woman. Now, the reason I say I can't remember very many is I've had so many rich opportunities to talk to people when they've come to the monastery to give us a retreat.
Yeah.
And of course, there's always time to sign up and go and speak to the retreat director. So I've shared my journey with a lot of people over the past 60 years.
Yes.
But as far as real spiritual directors, I mean, that I made appointments for on a regular basis, I guess I would say that all of them had a respect for me.
Mm.
They respected me for who I was as a person and whatever I brought to the session. And I don't think I was ever asked to do something in particular. Like was never any agenda that any of the directors had.
Mm-hmm.
But they were all different. All of them had a different style.
Yes.
Approach. A couple of them were Ignatian, and a couple were not.
Right. Yeah.
One was a man who was very, very educated and proficient with the Enneagram. And that was a help to me at the time. I could see things through that lens, why I was reacting to certain things, why I was feeling certain ways. It helped me to understand my fourness and how my fourness affected my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I was thinking about this as well. I've had 5. I've had 5 directors in the course of 10 or so years. 1 man and 4 women. And that has been an intentional choice. I told you the story of my first director, Jared, who ended up, coming to train us and whatnot. But I have often been pastored by or formed by men. That's pretty typical in the church. And so as a man myself, it felt very important to intentionally seek out the wisdom, the pastoral gifting, the leadership, etc. of a woman. And so I wanted to kind of put myself under that, especially as a man, and especially as a man who's in leadership, So that was kind of a basic thing that I had going through my mind. And like you, I would say all of my directors, although they've all had their unique personality, their approach, their training, they've all been great listeners. I've always felt like I could empty the bucket of my thoughts and feelings, and that they weren't just waiting to interrupt me and get in a word, They've been patient, I guess, with my speech and with what I was bringing to the table. And that's been right across different traditions. I mean, I had a 90-year-old Jesuit director. I'm just thinking of whether to name drop this person or not. What do you think? Should I name drop this person?
Is this person living?
They are.
Maybe that person would appreciate, although he doesn't look for directees anymore, I'm sure. Not at 90.
Well, it was, that's a good way to say it. As a way to honor, I was very privileged to have Father Joseph Tetlow as my spiritual director for a number of years on Zoom. And like I said, when we started meeting, he was 90 years old.
Lovely.
And such a gentle, kind, beautiful man, really. And the way that he listened was so humble and gracious and patient. So yes, I would like to name him. And what a gift that was. But him and the others, I guess... now that I'm realizing it, I've had 6 directors, so 2 men and 4 women. So pardon me. But yes, him and the others have always had this quality of patient listening, not making me feel like I had to hurry up and finish what I was talking about. not making me feel like they were just waiting to get their words in, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting that your explanation about choosing women, like you were quite conscious. I'm not sure I was that conscious of choosing men, but it makes sense since I live with women.
Right, yeah.
That I would want that other kind of energy.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a compliment, like not a compliment as in giving me some nice feedback, but
Yes.
it was a compliment to who I am as a woman. And something else that you said about the listening, and, well, it reflected back to me about respect.
Yeah.
I can't think of it right now, but it'll come back to me.
Yeah, sure. We talked about the book Holy Listening, Margaret Guenther, not Guenther. And so I revisited how she describes spiritual directors in that book. And she says, and I think you'll like this, the spiritual director is a midwife of the soul, one who accompanies another as new life in God emerges and takes shape. And that midwifery image is very much, I'm not here to make this thing happen. That is up to you. But I am here to accompany you, encourage you, support you, to be with you throughout the whole process, to see that it happens, to see it,
Yes.
to see it through, right?
Yeah, another aspect of that is that the new life that the director is midwifing is in the person.
Correct, yeah.
It's all there. It's just, let's bring it to the light.
That's
Bring it to the light of day so that it can live
beautiful.
in a different environment. It's had enough of the inner life. Now it's got to come into the light.
That's great. Yeah, so the director is not coming to superimpose from the outside something, but is seeking to nurture and steward what is already resident in the directee to emerge fully, trusting that this is a work of God. This is the leading of the Spirit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another person that used that image was Maureen Conroy, a Mercy sister, who was the one that helped us start our Shekinah training program. She would talk about midwifing. But I remember now what I was going to say about a minute ago. Father John English was one of my spiritual directors.
Yeah.
He was living in Winnipeg at the time, so I had the personal one-on-one, face-to-face with him. And I remember one very important thing that he said to me, because as a 4, I could become kind of melancholy, and I could be hard on myself. And he said to me, you mustn't be hard on yourself. That's hard for your soul. And that was very helpful to me, not to be hard on my soul.
Yeah.
Yeah. I cherish that.
Yeah. What a beautiful articulation. Yeah.
And he encouraged joy.
Yeah.
When he was dying, I went to see him in the hospital. And I had done some work. I was actually living in Edmonton at the time, but I was home for a visit and went to see him. And I whispered to him, I think I found the joy.
Oh.
I hope that meant something to him, but it meant something to me to tell him what he had encouraged in me.
That was on his deathbed?
Yes. Yes. He never recovered. So he took that to heaven with him.
Yeah. Well, good for you for speaking that out to him. Wow. Well, I was thinking about, there's sort of the stock, I guess you could say in some ways, academic way to define a spiritual director. In some ways, it's almost better to describe the qualities of a spiritual director. What sorts of people are they, And so I was thinking at first of spiritual directors are persons of love. And what I meant by that is love in kind of three different ways, probably more, but at least three. One is that they are marked by a love for God. You know, they have taken their life with God, their spirituality, they've taken it seriously and intentionally. And I've felt that with all of my directors in different ways, but my most recent director, who I see online, she's a Carmelite, or affiliated with the Carmelites somehow. She's married, so she's not a strict Carmelite. Maybe an oblate, I don't know.
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. But I remember she began our first ever session with an opening prayer. And I don't often feel struck by people's prayer in terms of how much they seem to love God. I know that sounds so weird to say, but I really felt like I could sense her love and affection for God in the way that she prayed. Like God was not some thing that she was just in a sort of rote or routine way talking to, but there was tenderness and affection. And I can't even give you an example necessarily of what she said, but it was just this impression of, oh my goodness, my spiritual director loves God.
There's a real relationship
there.
there.
And it was very comforting for me to know that I was going to be sitting with someone, accompanied by someone who had a very sort of fundamental love for God. And then later in passing, she told me, she goes to Mass every day and spends an hour in adoration. And I was just so blessed by, this person is not doing those things just to tick off some box so they can be a competent director. Yeah. They have a deep love for God that leads them to sit in contemplation for an hour every day. Perhaps a better way to say it is they're being deeply loved by God every day, and from the outflow of that, they're sitting with me and seeking to love me, to have me experience this love.
Yeah.
And I was just so struck by this, most recently with this new director.
Yeah. And she shared something of her spiritual life
She
with
did.
you.
Yeah.
At the beginning of your relationship.
Yes.
You know, what you said about she sits and she has this love for God and it's mutual. And I'm remembering that when you would come here to pray in our chapel, you said of it once, I just sit there and let God love me. I thought that was so beautiful. It's such intimacy. So that flows into your direction with other people.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Oh,
I've thought of that when I sit and pray. Is that what I'm doing? Letting God love me, or am I fighting with God? Am I resisting?
Yeah.
Or am I able to receive love?
Well, I should probably credit that sort of phrasing or something I've stolen from a directee of mine who I think talked about their sort of burgeoning sense of vocation as believing that they were created to allow themselves to be loved by God, that's a part of their vocation as they understand it. And that also stuck with me for many months, if not years. And so I probably borrowed and stole that line. Although that is what I'm trying to do.
Yes.
Trying,
it's
quote
real.
unquote. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Well, to add to that, and not to out you, but when you have come out of chapel a couple of times, with this in the back of my mind, you said, I think I fell asleep. That's how comfortable you are being loved, even when you sleep.
That's right, yes. Well, sometimes the quiet of your chapel and the silence is very conducive to that drowsiness.
And God can love you.
That's right.
Even while you sleep.
That's right.
Especially
indeed.
while you sleep.
Especially, yeah, that's right. So a spiritual director is a person of love, a person who loves God. Second, I thought of a spiritual director obviously is a person who has a love for people. And that love, I think, is often best expressed in their posture of listening. And also they love listening. And they also, I think, especially love listening to people's talk about their experience of God. because I know there's a lot of professions where people listen and they may love listening, but a real spiritual director, I think, not only has a deep love for people insofar as wanting to listen to them, but also particularly loves listening to people talk about their experience of God, their spirituality, which again is not just what are you doing from 7 to 8 when you pray. It's the whole of their life, right? But, I have told, I think feeling that sense of love for me, feeling that love of listening, I have told my directors things I've told nobody,
Likewise.
Right? And so you feel these people not only love God, but you feel that love they have for you, that they really want to listen with love.
Yes.
Right?
And doesn't the love that they bear toward you in that situation help you to realize that you are loved?
Yes, absolutely.
My experience is so many people don't, I include myself here, we're not good at loving ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's why it's a command. Love one another as I have loved you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's right. The spiritual director, being a person who themselves loves God, ends up being a sort of conduit of the love of God to the directee. And that there's something about that the director themselves loves. I love the person sitting in front of me that I'm listening to. I love listening to them. I love hearing their experience of God. And I love when they sense the love of God through this thing that we're doing, right?
Yeah. And when they do, sometimes it's evident, well, I think always, it's evident in their bearing, Sometimes it's tears.
Yeah.
When they realize that God is here and God loves me. And that makes me realize maybe I am lovable.
Yes. That's right. Well, and a final thing that I thought of as it pertains to spiritual directors being people of love. So they love God, they love people, but they also love attending to their relationship between God and people. They love nurturing the love between people and God, right? Mm-hmm. And so the image that I often think of with this is, those 4 beautiful friends in the gospel who hoist their paralyzed friend up to the roof, dig a hole in the roof, and then lower him down. Mm-hmm. And I think that is just that's a wonderful picture in part of what spiritual directors do is we expend our love to put the directee into the presence of love, capital L, right? Like, how can we facilitate this loving relationship that already exists, that's already within them, but that they may not be fully cognizant of, may not be fully aware of, may not be fully participating in? How can we hoist or lower these people into the presence of Jesus? They love doing that. Mm-hmm.
They loved the person, this friend who needed healing, so much that they brought that person to Jesus in spite of the obstacles.
Yes.
And I think that says something very important about spiritual direction. It can be very healing. It can be enlightening. It can be supportive and encouraging. But it's because we bring people to Jesus, to God, or we invite people to go there, whether it's through word or just presence. That's where the third chair comes in. Here, look at the third chair. Sit in that with him.
Yes. Yeah.
I love that. And you know what also comes to mind, a story from the gospel, is the poor guy who couldn't get into the pool.
Yes.
Because nobody was there to take him.
Yeah.
See, he didn't have a spiritual director. So Jesus met him there.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Well, in my, again, evangelical upbringing, I know the terminology is different, but we have these things called worship leaders, We've talked about this before.
Yes.
And the worship leader is typically the one who leads the musical section of the service, right? Or whatever. I know in your tradition, the worship is the entire service.
Yes.
Right? Which is beautiful. But anyway, I was a worship leader. I am a worship leader, I guess you could say. I discovered a deep love and joy in leading people in singing, responding to God through song. And some of my favorite things about that is, I'm at the front with a microphone and a guitar or whatever, and leading the song or whatever. And then there are these moments where people, it's like they've just totally forgotten that I'm there. And they're just singing their heart out to God. Sometimes their eyes are closed. Maybe their hands are open in a receptive posture. But these moments when, yes, I'm the leader there, but now I've sort of dissolved to the background and they are having their own experience and interaction with God. And so for me, when I first became a spiritual director or first found spiritual direction, I thought, this is what I have loved doing as a worship leader for so long. Yes, I'm creating a space. There's some gentle facilitation. I'm not really telling people what to do, although I know there's some worship leaders that are heavy-handed and, stand up, sit down, clap, dance, do all this stuff, very instructive.
Oh dear.
But it didn't really suit my personality very often to do that kind of thing, although sometimes gentle encouragements are good. But my favorite thing was just watching people be in love with God, watching God love people. And I'm just sort of there watching from the front, and that for me is kind of like how I've understood spiritual direction as well, as I am not the focus of this time, although I'm holding this time and space for you. Really, it's a time for you to lovingly express yourself to God and to have God lovingly communicate and relate to you. And I'm just there to nurture that mutuality of love.
Yes, that's very humble, in the sense of true. You aren't the focus, but you're important. You're important as kind of a conduit of the energy, the presence. You're not the star.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I love the way you make those comparisons with real life experience to compare to spiritual direction.
Well, I think being a spiritual director has really informed how I think about leadership in the church in any form, whether it's leading the music or whether it's giving the homily or, the service or whatever, or even meeting people one-on-one in a pastoral capacity is always, how can I help the focus between God and the person come into sharper view? What's happening in the loving relationship here? How can I turn up the heat on that, And I don't mean like somehow manipulate it. I just mean turn up the attention on that. Okay, so what are you saying to God, and what's your sense of what God's doing, and how are you feeling about that? And, how is God experiencing your feelings about this? That sort of thing. Just talk to one another, relate to one another.
Yes, helping a person pay attention to the presence of God to them.
Yeah.
And sometimes even giving enough space in the session for them to relate to God.
Yes.
So it's not a whole lot of talking sometimes. It's silence so the person can attend to God, can talk to God, and listen.
Yes.
And listen isn't hearing words. It's deeper than that. It may be a quality of presence that God communicates to the person. And I believe that in that silence, something very important can happen. Sometimes people are moved to tears. You can tell that something is happening between God and the person. It's a beautiful thing to witness. When all you've done is say, can you share that with God right now?
Correct.
Is there something you'd like to say to God about this? Or what do you hear God saying? Let's have a moment of silence. Pay attention to that.
Yeah. Well, at least for this conversation, this section, I think that's a good place to pause. We had some wonderful meandering detours, so we'll resume, continuing on this conversation of what is a spiritual director soon.
Okay.